Really happy to have Chris come and say a few words. We call this our alumni conference, and now that we've been around for so long, we actually have lots of alumni that are doing good things, and we try to bring them back together. And at the same time, we have a lot of students here, so as was mentioned this morning, one of the key things we wanted to do, or we try to do all the time, is make sure we have all our grad students participate and get to meet everybody. Anyway, so I'm hoping Chris can speak to being an IESVic alumni and his career, and give us a few thoughts about, what he's learned after 30 years. So Chris, please.
So I thought what I'd do is I'd start with kind of an IESVic history lesson. And when it first started, because since we have David over here, who was the dude who did it all, I came in a wave which wasn't first. So we were sitting with Gary over there, who was actually, and Adrian, who were before Ken and I and others arrived. But the way it was structured in the beginning was there was basically three groups. There was the Economic Analysis Integration Group, and that was run by Holger Rogner. And then there were two groups out of that we were working on various technologies. One was called Cryofuel Systems. That was run by Dr. John Barclay. And then there was the fuel cell group, and it had a bunch of different professors associated with it. That we were Zoomin Dong and Ned and Jed and others were all involved with that. But the way it was done, and David, if I got this wrong, please correct me. But there were these the curves. I can't remember the name of the curves, but they started with Marchetti curves, right? So everybody's looking at the Marchetti curves and looking at what decarbonization looked like. And, we went from trees to coal to oil to natural gas and then to hydrogen. And I think that was the basis under which the two groups were set up. We were going, what are the big barriers as we go through this decarbonization of the energy system? So we're quite ahead of our time at that particular moment. People weren't thinking about it really that way. Now, of course, everybody's talking about decarbonization. So the two groups were set up and they were built around. For the cryofuel systems, it was built around energy density. Everybody said, that's the problem, it's energy density. We got to figure out a way to make LNG, and do it cheaper, or not cheaper, but do it. and then the other one was around fuel cells and being able to fuel cells and building energy conversion devices in which we convert hydrogen into power. So what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about how that use of macroeconomics was powerful and how today we're kind of at a similar point, but I think we could be way more specific today. Right? We can use these economics, but I think there's some very specific things that we can focus on, to be able to say, look, here are some areas that are really, really important, and maybe building out the same effort. So treat these as suggestions as we go forward. Oops. Let's start with the new motivation. As there was lots of talk today about the ICP report, the new one that came out in November. Has everybody read that? The 1.5 degree one that's going to be impossible to obtain, and we're never ever going to get there in a million years. Have you guys read that? If you haven't, you should read it. And if you have children, you could read it to them instead of Brothers Grimm, because it'll be just as terrifying. REM wrote a song that said, it's the end of the world as we know it. And, I'm a really optimistic guy. So we're going to have a silver lining here in the end. But in a very literal sense, it's the end of the world as we know it. It's not going to be the same as we have been experiencing. It's changing now. And there's certain things that are irreversible that are going to progress, and everything's baked in, and this is what's going to happen. So, we're trying to keep the temperature raised at 1.5 degrees C because everything gets a lot worse at 2 degrees, and then everything gets exponentially worse at 3 degrees and beyond. So, 3 degrees is kind of a forget about it scenario. So really, what's the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees? And I'm just going to talk very quickly about that on motivation. I should mention that I assumed I had 15 minutes. So I've divided this into three parts. I'm going to talk about motivation, then I'm going to talk about impact tech, and then I'm going to come back to IESVic. And I was telling it to my niece a little bit about what I was doing. She's 21, and she suggested I do them in 30-second increments to better match the whole social networking world that we're in. But the best I can do is 5-minute chunks. So if you need to look at your phone, go ahead. So why should we hold the world to 1.5 degrees? So if you looked at the report, I'm not going to describe it to you, they have all these real beautiful looking bar graphs. And the bar graphs kind of go from yellow to red to purple. Purple's bad. Yellow's and white are okay, purple's bad. Purple's never good. Well, unless you're an emperor, I guess. So we have these unique ecosystems. We start with the unique ecosystems and species. So I got some topics here, right? So, we talked a little bit about species, disappearing and ecosystems disappearing. So at 1.5 degrees, unique ecosystems and species are severely threatened. At 2 degrees, much of them are irreversibly gone. So, the difference often between 1.5 and 2 degrees is there's an irreversible component to it. And those of you who are thermodynamicists will understand that and realize that that's probably not a good thing. The second one is extreme weather events. So 1.5 degrees is severe and widespread. 2 is more severe and more widespread. Not quite as bad. The warm water corals. So are there any divers in the room? Anybody snorkel, dive? So they're gone. Sorry, they're gone at 1.5. Right? They're in the slow bake now, right? We've acidified the oceans and they're bleaching, and that is inexorably going to destroy the warm water reef systems. And at 2 degrees, they're irreversibly gone. So we don't even know really what that means when that whole species subsystem is wiped out. We don't even really know. But it's already a done deal. I don't know why I'm laughing. I just don't know what else you can do. Low latitude fisheries, 1.5 degrees, severely threatened, 2 degrees, irreversibility sets in. So we're talking about, really fewer tonnage, like real reductions to the tonnage of the fisheries that we have. Coastal flooding, 1.5 degrees, severe and widespread, 2 degrees, severe and widespread with limited adaptability. So that's a big key, right? Because the people who are going to need the adaptability and the money that's going to need to go into it, which we'll talk about in a bit, is going to be a real difficult problem going forward. Heat-related morbidity and mortality, 1.5 is detectable increases, and we're starting to see it a little bit, and 2 degrees is severe and widespread. I'm going to stop there because that's enough, right? But the point is that, it's like much that we see in science and engineering, that 1.5 and 2 degrees is not linear at all, right? We get into these exponential changes, and that's what happens. And, I couldn't even find really much to talk about at 3 degrees, so I decided that let's not go there. 2 degrees is enough. So with those differences, I'm still on the motivation side, so I'm still in my 5 minutes. What can we do to hold it, right? How are we going to keep the temperature to 1.5 degrees? So the cumulative amount of CO2 and GHGs have gone in the atmosphere since the 18th century is a lot. And when they calculate the radiative forcing associated with that, it's about 3 watts per meter squared. And when they calculate what the temperature change should be with that, it's about 2.4 degrees, right? Which is far more than what we're seeing now, which is about 1 degree. So there's some good news about that. There's a lag due to global temperatures achieving steady state with the forcing. Then there's aerosols that we're putting in the atmosphere that are reflecting the sunlight away. So that's helping us. So we can figure out which ones those are. We could maybe use more of them. Hopefully it's a hairspray or something innocuous like that. And then there's this, something they call a climate sensitivity parameter. And we're not sure we got that one exactly right. But the fact is that we're kind of baked in, already, something that's much greater in a calculation of the amount that's in the atmosphere. So in order to hit, according to the report, to get high confidence, they separate into low, medium, and high confidence. I'm not quite sure what that means, but let's assume high confidence is good. So to get high confidence, to hit 1.5 degrees C without overshoot requires a 40 to 50% reduction in our emissions by 2030 over our 2010 baseline. So I can't remember how much we were doing in 2010, but it's less than now, right? And then by 2030, we need to be 40, 50% less than 2010 to try to just get this to 1.5 degrees without an overshoot, which gets us into those differences I was talking about between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So if we stay on the path we are, we're heading for 3 to 3.5. And we heard that today, which was, it was terrific, but it was good information that we heard that for all the pledges that were made, right, or have us on a 3 or higher trajectory. Now, I gotta add some more gloom to this. Sorry.
This is the motivation part?
This is the motivation part. Aren't you feeling motivated? No?
Sure, yeah, I'm waiting for it.
Okay, I'll get to it. So we haven't even talked about feedback mechanisms yet, right? So we've got the permafrost just kind of sitting there like a boogeyman, right? Just waiting for things to warm up so it can release all its CO2 and its methane. We got the methane from the wetlands. You know, as soon as we start drying out the wetlands, the release is much greater. We've got our forests are burning, so we have this beautiful carbon sink in trees, but we're going to burn them down and release them into the atmosphere. Then we have these things called methane hydrates that are, you know, sitting at the bottom of the ocean, which are full of methane, and they're starting to go. So let's just pretend, right, for a moment that none of that exists, okay? But the point is the 1.5 degree. Trying to hold on to that is really quite important. But we're not going to do it. But maybe, you know, if we get the overshoot, maybe the overshoot can be really quite limited. So the message I'm trying to make on motivation is, we've lost the battle, but we haven't lost the war yet. Okay?
We haven't died.
Right. We're not. Is that, that's pretty good. I feel okay about that. So who's going to take it on the chin? None of us, really, right? That's part of the problem, is that none of us are really going to suffer that much for this. It's going to happen. This morning we got the talk, and they showed the map, and all the red sections, you know, they probably map perfectly to where our poorest and most underprivileged citizens in the world are. And that's who's going to take it on the chin. So, you know, it's the reason why we haven't really got into it is that it doesn't, you know, humans are funny, right? If it doesn't affect us directly, we don't do much about it. But the catastrophe that's unfolding in front of us in slow motion is really quite devastating. And there's going to be all kinds of impact that's going to come from that. So you know, the people in this room are people that can really potentially make an impact and help turn some of that around. So that's that side of the motivation. I'm going to go to another side of motivation.
Okay, good.
So protecting the planet, the disadvantaged, the poor populations, and preventing land wars, right? Land migration wars aren't motivation enough. Here's another reason. There's going to be $2.4 to $2.8 trillion invested in this space over the next 10 to 15 years. There's going to be trillions and trillions of dollars in new markets, actually in market capture, that's going to emerge as these industries shift. So you can be a hero and you can make $1 million at the same time, right? Which is not a bad combination, right? You kind of get both sides of it. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a massive market opportunity at the same time. And for all of us who believe that altruism is a goal and should be enough, that's very noble, and I agree with it. But when you're trying to make new technologies and put them out in the market, the dollar is going to dominate, right? And we all have to be very, very aware of that, because if we're not building things that make sense for customers to adopt stuff quickly, it's going to happen really slowly, and we're not going to get there. We're going to be on that 3 degree trajectory. So, what can we do? What can we do about all this? There's 4 levers that we can pull. One is we can adapt, and we will, but who's going to pay? right? And who's going to pay for those populations that need to adapt that can't afford it? So that's going to be a really big issue. The second one is we can legislate new policies, carbon taxes, etc. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. We've got Trump in the States. We have nationalist governments popping up all over the place. Macron tried to increase, the gas tax by a couple of cents, and we got the yellow vests all, burning France down. This is not going to be something that we're going to be able to just, solve with a carbon tax, and we're going to be able to do that way. There's maybe eventually, but not in any kind of time frame we need. There's behavioral changes, so we can stop driving, we can stop eating meat, we can stop flying around. Not going to happen, right? It's just simply not going to happen. We're not going to do that. I was driving here with Ken, and Ken suggested in behavioral changes, the one thing we haven't tried is shaming. And I thought it was a good point. I thought it was a really good point. And his example to me was, who wears fur anymore? Right? You wear fur, somebody throws a can of paint on you, it's you don't wear your furs anymore. So, not that I'm suggesting it, but, if you see a Hummer parked in a parking lot, you...
Or a Mercedes.
Yeah, well, one that uses a lot of gas. Be careful. Yeah, well, he is. Every now and then he comes up with a nugget. You just have to wait around a lot for it to emerge. If you're gonna, by the way, a quarter, it's got those serrated edges. Not that it means anything, right? If you see a Hummer and you have a quarter, I don't know. You do what you want. So I'm not quite sure, how behavior change work. I don't think behavior change is going to happen anywhere anytime soon. So we're left with one, and it's impact tech, and I got there, right? That's what you asked me to talk about. So it's impact tech, and frankly, geoengineering belongs in impact tech, and it's a subject that we haven't heard much about. Maybe we'll hear about it tomorrow, but it belongs there. We need to think about it. It's our best chance, I think, because we can do transparent changes. The problem with technology innovation and market adoption is that, especially in clean tech, if you do everything absolutely right and everything breaks your way, it's 10 years, from when you start to when you actually get somewhere where anybody's going to buy it. So it's 2019, right? Those targets for 2030. We don't have those. Those techs aren't just lined up, right? So 2030 and being able to stay to 1.5 it's just not realistic, and we just have to accept it, and let's try not to overshoot too bad, I think, is the thing we need to do now, and figure out a way, once we overshoot, to bring it back to 1.5 and spend as little time as we can in the overshoot region. So what makes a high impact technology? Now I'm on to part 2. So number one is, and we heard a lot about it today, is it has to be customer driven, right? You can have impact tech all you want, but if you don't have a landing market and people aren't buying it, and they're not buying it for economic reasons, it's really hard to make it happen in any kind of time frame that's going to be meaningful. So I shouldn't say that it has to be customer driven, but indeed it does if we want to talk about the time frames that we want to talk about. The second one is it has to mitigate a lot of GHGs. So at IBET, we use 1 gigaton. So when we do the tech and we look at it, it has to meet a 1 gigaton mitigation standard. Breakthrough Energy Ventures, the Bill Gates fund that he's got, they use 0.5 gigaton, but it needs to be of that magnitude and that order. It should take less than 10 years to go from ideation to product. And here's the kicker. This is the most important one. The energy it produces or the products it makes have to be the same cost or less than the incumbent! Exclamation mark. And because that's the only way that's going to happen in any kind of time frame that's going to make sense for the things we're trying to do, which sets a wonderful challenge for the people in this room, right? It's not just about getting a technology idea going. It's about getting a technology idea going that has the economics that allows us to introduce something to a customer that's the same or cheaper than what they're using today. And that has not been clean tech's strong point, over the last many years. So what I'm trying to say is we need to stop fiddling around the edges, right? We need to drive a truck right through the heart of our energy production and our major GHG sources. And we need to go right after those industries. We need solutions for all of them: energy, building, agriculture, everything. We need to transform those. We need to reconfigure our supply chain so our feedstocks are based on renewable sources. We need innovation tech to keep the costs down. We need all of those kinds of things to happen. And I think we can. I think we can. And we're not going to stay under 1.5, but I think we can get it back, right? So hydrocarbons. I want to talk, this is a theme I pick up that Gary talked a little bit about today. I know it's controversial, but I'm going to be controversial anyways. Canada will use its trust fund. Its trust fund is its hydrocarbons, and they're in the ground. We're going to use them. Here's why we're going to use them. Because every techno-economic analysis that you do shows how important feedstock costs are. Whenever you calculate it and see what it's going to be, one of your biggest cost numbers is always the feedstock. So hydrocarbons are the cheapest, most abundant sources of hydrogen and carbon that we have. The problem is we haven't been using them. Well, it's not we haven't been using them incorrectly. We just can't use them the way we've been using them. We can't burn them in air like we with oxygen, like we have them, mix them with nitrogen and venting them out. We can't do that. But they're sitting there and they're full of hydrogen and they're full of carbon. And both of these are valuable materials when they're not together and burnt with air in a burner. So, we're not the only one. Japan's getting its hydrogen from brown coal in Australia, right? And they can land it in Japan cheaper than they can make it for in Japan, right? They can land it from Australia and Japan. They're sequestering all the CO2 that they're making under the strait between Tasmania and Melbourne. China Energy, who we know, world's largest coal producer, has flatly said our coal is coming out of the ground. Now, they also said we're looking at using it differently, using it sustainably. But they're going to pull it out of the ground, and they're going to use it because it's a super cheap source of hydrogen. And I know people say water's cheap, right? We got all this hydrogen and water, it's cheap. But it's not really, because we have to use electrolysis in order to convert it to hydrogen. And that means that the feedstock is now renewable, baseload, dispatchable electricity. And that's not cheap. And that's why that hydrogen costs a lot more, for example, than hydrocarbon hydrogen. And by the way, carbon on the other side is a beautiful material, right? We can use it for all kinds of different things, including producing power. So carbon in itself isn't the enemy. It's just carbon dioxide mixed together with nitrogen and having to separate it and do all those things. That's where the problem happens. So there's ways, and this is a technical problem, right? It's a techno-economic problem, but it's kind of right in the wheelhouse of this group here. So back to IESVic now. So the IESVic structure. So that's the motivation, right? I think we're not going to get where we need to go, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We can hopefully tilt those curves over. So what are the cryofuel systems groups and what are the fuel cell groups of today? What do they look like? That was a question I was asking myself based on when we started way back in the early 90s. So where are the biggest emissions? Natural gas grid, right? 20 to 30% of emissions from a natural gas grid. There it is. It's in the ground. It delivers us all energy. Are we going to rip it out, right? Are we going to? Of course we're going to use it, right? So we need to figure out a way to use it. So what are the technical challenges? Gary outlined one that we're tackling within Econis. That's green-blue hydrogen at a cost that's on par with natural gas, right? And maybe with the incentive of the carbon dioxide. There's in situ solutions to pipeline compatibility with hydrogen, right? As we start to build these things out. Just as an idea of a couple potential impact techs that can make a big difference where we're using existing infrastructure and it's transparent to the things that we need to do. Refrigeration and air conditioning, 20% of emissions. Come on, magnetic refrigeration, boom, right? As another potential way of doing this, and maybe we can double the efficiency there. And that's already happening, right, to a certain degree. Data centers, computing energy, projected to be 20 to 30% of emissions by 2050. That's how fast they're growing. So, there's a lot of different ways that they're looking at being able to provide energy, but maybe there's breakthroughs in reversible computing that we should be pressing on, right, to be able to reduce the inefficiency. I mean, if our computers were cars, we'd be getting, a tenth of a mile to a gallon in them, right? They're the equivalent of that kind of thing. Liquid fuels, right? We talk about those, Steve, quite a bit, 30-40% of current emissions. So, we always talk about going to RNG and to biofeedstock-based liquid fuels, but it just doesn't work. The economics don't work for doing that. So, maybe the geneticists, and the engineers can work together, and we can work on Gen 4 biofeedstocks that can be specifically grown with, maybe we do something with the lignin to increase density, whatever we might be doing. But these are areas that could be potential interesting areas to cause breakthroughs in these large markets. Livestock methane emissions. One that we found interesting was RNAi technology. And it's an RNA interference technology, and you spray it over the field, and you take out all the plants that cause the cows to be methane emitters, and you convert them to CO2 emitters. And we all know that the ratio is like 1 to 30 almost in terms of the intensity of those greenhouse gases. Negative emissions, and Adrian and his team, started something at Carbon Engineering, but there's also the oceans. Maybe there's a CO2 capture program from the oceans. The US Navy's doing it already. They're not doing it for the same reasons. They're doing it so that their aircraft carriers, don't have the supply chain and they don't have the tether to the land, but they're using something called a pH swing system in order to create carbon dioxide and hydrogen from ocean water, and they're synthesizing fuel at sea, and they're using it in their jets to fly their missions. Not quite there yet, but they're working on it. But the point is, maybe we can figure out a way to, take the CO2 out of our oceans. Maybe we can make a dent in the acidification problem at the same time. And then geoengineering, right? And I guess, is it time yet for geoengineering? Kind of leave that as an open question, but it's certainly getting close to considering that. And I think IESVic gives us this wonderful bird's eye view of what this system looks like. And we adopt some of these principles we're talking about, and you focus on some of these areas. We've got wonderful companies. We got Carbon Engineering, and we got General Fusion, who you heard from, and we got Inventus, and they're all trying to solve problems too. And they're BC companies, and they'd be great places to start, to be able to see, and sit with them and say, what is the number one problem? What's causing you? What's causing your economic pain? What's causing your introduction pain? Right? We got people sitting in the room here who could probably answer those questions. So I wanted to finish on that high note, right? And say, go IESVic, right? Because, the people in this room, I think, will have the best chance of making a dent in this massively, but not quite untractable problem that we have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was perfect. I'm still not sure if I'm depressed or excited, but that's every day in this job. No, thanks very much. There is so much good stuff happening from former IESVic students, right? The alumni are doing all sorts of interesting things. So that to me is why we come to work. It's really motivational. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say for tonight. I'll see you tomorrow morning, and we have a very full day, and we're going to try and stick to the timing. So please be in your seats for 8:45.
A birthday party at 4:30.
And a birthday party and birthday cake at 4:30. Okay, thank you.